Okay, Chris, so we are now going to have our walking tour of the local history center, and we are starting where it all got started.
That's correct. This was, as I mentioned, when this started, I just started with one room, and this was the initial set of displays. And the very first exhibit I did was right here to highlight the railroads in Mattoon, because Mattoon was actually formed when the two railroads crossed here on the prairie, the Illinois Central and what was then the Terre Haute and East Alton Railroad. So this it was the initial display to kind of highlight that. And then as I moved on in this room, a lot of people, when they found out that I was doing some of the historical research here, I started getting questions. And some of the early questions were on, that I mentioned before, the gas stations, grocery stores, restaurants. There's a tremendous interest in some of the car dealers in the old days in Mattoon. So everything in this room I kind of put together based on the interest that I was getting from people on topics that were of interest to them. And as you can see, Mattoon had a great number of new car dealers over the years. This one display shows that altogether there were 64 brands of cars sold in Mattoon, starting in 1910, and there were about 114 dealers. So it tells that story. And then we tell the story of the history of the library. This is a 1903 Carnegie library. So we tell the story of the evolution of the library over those years. And then one of the most popular exhibits early on was after I put together a listing of the restaurants, gas stations, and grocery stores. I decided.
What are we looking at here?
This is a map of Mattoon, and the push pins show the location of those grocery stores, gas stations, and restaurants over the years. The blue pins are all the corner grocery stores, and it really gives a visual to let people see how prolific the corner grocery stores, mom and pops, were over the years, going all the way back to the turn of the century.
And you have some listings.
We have some listings of them. The red pins are the gas stations, and the yellow pins are the restaurants and drive-ins. And what's interesting when you look especially at the gas stations, back in the day when everybody bought branded gas, there are on almost every corner where there was one gas station, there'd be a second gas station on an opposite corner. So you can see how the gas stations were all clustered, and they primarily followed the two major highways that also intersected Mattoon. So that gets a lot of interest and a lot of discussion. In these boards here, I just really try and show we've got a tremendous amount of Mattoon memorabilia, a lot of it based around the early advertising. And so this was the first set of display cabinets that I used to display some of that. And we also have a very unique selection of yardsticks that all came from Mattoon businesses over the years.
Wow. Names that are this long gone but not forgotten.
That's correct. One of the really interesting stories in the early stories was, of course, the definitive story on Mattoon's original Burger King. And I was lucky enough, the Mattoon Burger King put me through Eastern 50 years ago. I worked there for 5 years, and I was personally acquainted and friends with Gene and Betty Hoots. And when I put this display together, I was lucky enough to be able to borrow Betty's scrapbook. So everything on this board is pretty well definitive. So we're going to walk down this way. This was kind of the next big project I did, using primarily city directories. And we put together a listing of the businesses that were located on Broadway and Western Avenue, starting in 1900, going all the way up to within a couple years ago. And this also gets a lot of interest from people when they like to come and they remember a store that they shopped at, or maybe a store that one of their relatives owned, and they can find it and identify it on this map. So this gets a lot of attention. This was a huge project to put together.
I'm looking back here at the starting point. It looks like 1808. That's going back.
No, that's the address.
Oh, 1808. Sorry, my bad.
Yeah, that's okay. That's 1808 Western.
Very good.
But the other interesting thing, and you keyed on something that's kind of interesting, is in 1897, the city commissioners assigned the city engineer the project of renumbering the streets because they had all just been numbered kind of willy-nilly as the town developed. So a lot of the early addresses don't match with today's streets,
Okay,
and
very good.
that causes some confusion from time to
Glad you
time.
clarified that. Very good. Just lots of names. This is unbelievable research.
One of the things that I discovered when I started this project, and it's been a huge boon to my research, is over the years the library had saved city directories. So we have city directories going back all the way to 1894, which was the very first city directory published in Mattoon.
Okay.
So as we move, this was then the next center that we did, the next room, and everything that I tried to do in here was focus on some of the major industries and institutions that really made Mattoon. And at the time, when I did this room, I had no idea that I was going to be able to take over another couple of rooms as we moved along. So this was really, I really put a lot of focus here onto the really major businesses that made Mattoon. Of course, everybody's familiar with Rural King. The very first Rural King was opened in Mattoon on June 5th in 1960. We've got the story of Illinois Consolidated Communications, which became Consolidated Communications. And the thing that's unique about this story is it's really the story of the Lumpkin family,
Yep.
the story of the telephone company, and it also is the story of the development of telephones through our displays, because we have some of the earliest telephones.
Oh yeah, look at that.
And
There are people watching this right now. Chris, what are we looking at right here? This is old school telephones.
these are old school telephones, an old school switchboard.
Oh, those are cool to see.
And a lot of this material all came from Dick Lumpkin's private collection.
Oh wow.
Yes, and he donated them while he was still living. This phone booth was when it was Dick's, was in his private collection, and I've had various people tell me they think this might have been in the U.S. Grant Hotel or it might have been in one of the banks. This is obviously an indoor telephone booth
Yes.
because it's wooden, but it kind of mirrors the look of the famous English red telephone boxes that you see in London.
Yes, I was going to say this looks like something out of of a movie maybe I've
Yeah.
seen it in England. So
Right.
right on point.
Yeah, the thing people don't realize when they see those red telephone booths in England, those are cast iron because
Correct.
they're outdoors.
What we just looked at was very much wood.
Yes, it was. So then we've got the history of Lakeland.
Yes.
Lakeland has been we have a great collaboration with Lakeland. Part of their curriculum is the print shop. So the Lakeland print shop does all of our display boards for us.
Mattoon's very fortunate to have higher ed
Yes, they are.
right here in our backyard.
Yeah. This wall also highlights some of the major industries in Mattoon, and a couple that I really highlight is Atlas Imperial Diesel, which came here in the 30s, and during World War II they manufactured artillery shells. So they were the Mattoon's really only war production plant during World War II. And then Keeney Manufacturing came here in the 1930s, and they started out building wooden dinette sets and bedroom furniture. And in the mid-50s, they started making the chrome dinette sets of what we now call mid-century modern. And they were the largest manufacturer of chrome dinette sets in the United States. And so they were made right here in Mattoon. And then we've got the history of healthcare
Fantastic.
with Sarah Bush.
And pre-Sarah Bush.
And pre-Sarah Bush, all the way back to Memorial Methodist Hospital.
Always wondered what the names of the pre-Sarah Bush hospitals were in Charleston and Mattoon. So very cool to see that.
And in our school corner over here shows we have a timeline that shows the history of all the Mattoon schools, going all the way back to the very first one that was built in 1864. And then to your left, you see we have a collection of Mattoon High School yearbooks going all the way back to 1904. These yearbooks are probably one of the most popular items here. People come down and spend hours going through our yearbooks.
You can certainly tell which ones are newer and older.
Correct. Yes. So to probably keep a little momentum here, we'll move along down to the
We're doing good.
back in the next hall. And this is, again is a display of other businesses that didn't quite reach the level of longevity or employment of the ones that we highlighted in the main room. But these are also businesses that a lot of people remember that they had a significant impact on Mattoon. And one of the reasons that a lot of them came, of course, was because they were heavy industry and they needed the rail. And Mattoon was able to provide rail service.
Yeah, so the timing of the train tracks certainly allowed these businesses, even if they weren't like the Young Radiator Company. I think people know that location.
Yes.
It's now a plot of land, but
Exactly.
all
Yes.
places that
Yeah.
needed a place and certainly needed the workers.
And actually, Young Radiator was the successor to the Atlas diesel plant that we talked about in the other room. When Atlas left, Young Radiator bought that plant. Okay,
We're learning on the spot here.
there we go. We were fortunate enough when Donnelly, they closed their plant here in Mattoon, and we were fortunate enough to get some of their artifacts, and one of them is this. This was in their main lobby, and it shows the covers of the first Family Circle magazine that was published in Mattoon, the 100 millionth, the 200 millionth, and the 300 millionth. And so we're very, very fortunate to have that.
Many people have worked at R.R. Donnelly's through
Yes.
the years. I know it's changed names, but when you say R.R. Donnelly's, they know where you're talking about.
So you mentioned during our setup conversation about the impact of COVID. So during COVID, of course, when we were on restricted hours and for a while closed, that gave me this. So I tell people this is the COVID room. I did all this research and put all this together during COVID because I was here by myself.
See Douglas Hart over here. I see some Mattoon World Series. Just some very cool, almost potpourri type things of Mattoon through the years.
It is, and kind of the focus, other than those few specifics, in the other displays in the other room, we focused on a specific industry or a factory. So what I did here was pretty much focused on categories. So like we talk about the different hotels, the photography shops, the drug stores, the butcher shops, the ice dealers. A lot of people don't realize that, Mattoon back in the day had 3 different ice plants. And that was back in the days when people had an ice box. And so we have an ice box that when we get school groups in here, their kids are all fascinated with an old-fashioned ice box. Let me cut in front.
Oh, you're fine.
So just for fun, I've got a bunch of fake food in there so they can...
I've heard of the term ice box. I'm old enough to know what that term means, but
Well, the Iceman would come around in a wagon, and he'd bring a block of ice, and you put it in the top of the ice box, and the ice kept the food cold until it melted. But the primary business of these ice plants, besides selling residential ice, is they iced all the trains that came through. Because in the early days, before mechanical refrigeration, anything that needed to be chilled, fruit, produce, meat, came through on box cars that had ice bunkers of ice in the ends. So they would periodically stop and have to replenish the ice. And the Mattoon ice plants, the significant one was the Mattoon Refrigeration Company. They had a contract with the Big Four Railroad to ice every train between Kansas City and Indianapolis. So they stopped here to get fresh ice. And then we have, of course, the story on Lytle Park.
yes.
And in this section, I kind of call the municipal section because we highlight the city parks, the lakes, the cemeteries, the Mattoon Centennial. Mattoon was the first city in the state of Illinois that hosted free street fairs going back to 1897. And we have a story on the interurban line, which was also operated streetcars.
I've heard of that. I've heard of the legend of that through a Charleston program. That's
Right.
pretty cool.
Right.
That's how the two communities connected in the early days.
Exactly, and everybody is familiar, a lot of people are familiar that they had a very disastrous wreck, and that wreck was during the fair, and they doubled up the trains and the cars, and 2 of them collided. So everything in here, again, features pretty much that. We've got a display back here on what I call dining favorites. We can't highlight every one of the 400 plus restaurants that have been in Mattoon over the years. So we kind of picked out some of the ones that people remember. And, still to this day, people come in and say, I remember Gill's, I remember Tommaso's, when did Little Mexico start? One of the ones that's kind of my favorite to remember is Joe's Pizza, which was the very first pizza place in Mattoon, and he opened here in 1956. So again, you can see we just have a really varied exhibit on all the different businesses that really have contributed to Mattoon.
The movie theaters, I've heard about that history.
Yeah.
About the many different movie theaters.
Oh yes, yes.
In Mattoon and Charleston.
Yes, and there were a lot more than people realize.
Yeah, now we're just down to one.
Now we're down to exactly. So the next, our next stop is going to be, which was we talked about for a minute, was probably the most significant project that I did, and the one that took the most time. I probably have a year and a half of everyday research in putting together this story on Mattoon's role in the Civil War. And again, primarily because of the two railroads here, Mattoon became a major center for transportation. So we had two federal hospitals here. They were used for not surgical hospitals, but they were for convalescents. Mm-hmm. And so they would take the wounded soldiers off the trains. We had a federal corral here that at any given time probably had 1,000 horses and mules. We had, of course, the Camp Grant where the regiments were recruited and sworn in. 5 Illinois regiments were recruited here in Mattoon. Altogether, over 1,200 men from Mattoon and the immediate area served in different regiments during the Civil War. And so this is a roster of all those regiments. So it's in alphabetical order, and we have the rank, the company, and the unit that the men were in.
Very tedious research.
Like I said, this was probably the biggest single project that I've undertaken. It was every bit of a year and a half of just daily research work to put this all together. And then on this wall over here, what we show, so I talked about over on the wall of the roster of the men, we talked about the units that they were in. So this wall highlights, just in a snapshot, the history of the different regiments that Mattoon men served in. So you can, if you find somebody's name over there that you recognize or a relative, you can come over to this wall then and find the history of the unit that they served in. And several of these units had very valiant records. The 123rd Illinois is the one that I really like to focus on the most because it's kind of considered the Mattoon Regiment. And altogether, there were about 160 men from Mattoon that served in that regiment, and they also had 14 officers. This regiment had more officers from Mattoon than any other regiment in the Illinois Volunteers. So Mattoon had a really significant role to play primarily because of the transportation and because of Camp Grant. Mattoon also had after the war, Mattoon had a very active GAR operation. The GAR stood for the Grand Army of the Republic. And in 1914, the statewide convention was here in Mattoon. We also have in this center, we have what I would like to call the definitive book on all the different battles, books on the different battles that the different regiments that we highlight participated in. And we also have a lot of artifacts in here. Probably our most significant artifact is we have the coat, the vest, and the sword that belonged to Jonathan Biggs, who was the second in command of the 123rd Illinois Infantry. And after the commander, James Monroe, was killed in Farmington, Tennessee, Jonathan Biggs took over and commanded the regiment for the rest of the war. And we were able to acquire these items from a collector after he passed away. His estate sold off his collection, and we were able to acquire these items. And we have the actual bill of sale of when the collector, James Frasca, bought these items from Biggs' family. And again, like I mentioned mentioned earlier on the photos that we purchased, these items were purchased with private funds that we were able to raise.
Very nice.
Yeah. So we're getting a lot of Civil War buffs come down here and spend time as the word gets out that we have this. We like to think it's a very extensive display, and we have a lot of information, and it's met with a lot of interest.
It was a very big moment in our country's history. Maybe it wasn't the greatest of moments, but
Right.
there is, as you have with all the names behind you and their ranks, so much information. And now maybe some of that information is becoming known to people that didn't know was available.
Exactly, that's right. Yeah. So if we would like to go back down, we're going to go down to the lower level and talk about the Illinois Central. Wonder how our time's doing.
I wouldn't worry about that.
Okay.
Chris, as we walk down here, and before we get to the Illinois Central display, when you walk through this place on a given day, do you just go, wow, look at all the stuff that we have?
I do. I mean, I'm still kind of
What
amazed.
makes you most proud?
I'd say the Civil War. I'd say the Civil War.
All right.
Okay.
Where are we at now, Chris?
Okay, so now we're down into the newest exhibit, which we mentioned upstairs was based on these 70 photos that we acquired. So when I mentioned our earliest exhibit, Mattoon was founded when the two railroads crossed here in 1855. And the two railroads crossed at what's called grade level. And because of the way the railroad law worked, what we know as the Big Four Railroad, which was the successor to the Terre Haute and Alton Railroad that was here in 1855, had the right of way. So the Illinois Central had to stop and yield to the Big Four trains. And the Illinois Central was also responsible for the maintenance of the crossing. So by the early 1900s, that had become very problematic for a lot of reasons. One, with railroads, time is money, and when the trains are stopped waiting on the other train, they're burning money. But the other thing, it also was completely blocking the city of Mattoon, and so the city fathers were really putting a lot of pressure on the railroads to do something about these crossings. So in 1914, the Illinois Central undertook a project that they called the Illinois Central Track Depression Project. Locally, it's been alternately called the Big Dig, the $1 Million Dig, the Big Ditch, and most people today just refer to it as the subway. And so what the project entailed was lowering the Illinois Central tracks an average of 27 feet through Mattoon. So these photos that we have tell the story of this project. It was a mammoth project, and what the project entailed, since in not only digging out the subway and lowering the tracks, they had to build bridges across to connect all the streets, because previously they'd all just crossed at grade level. And there were a lot of other associated projects. Both railroads, they used a common terminal and ticket office, and they lost it because they had to excavate where that was going to be. So both railroads had to build new terminals. Both railroads built new freight warehouses. So it was a mammoth project, and it truly did run, $1 million. So as you flow through here, this tells the story, starting with what the situation was and how that came to be that they decided to make a change. And then we talk about, but the contractors that came in and did the work brought in giant steam shovels. So we've got a board that just kind of tells a little bit of the story and shows some of the pictures. Every picture here is actual pictures taken in Mattoon at the time. So that you can see, this is my favorite, and that's why we've enlarged it to larger, because it shows the gondola that they dumped the dirt in, it shows the temporary wooden bridge, it shows the embankment, and it shows the steam shovel getting ready to make another cut. Altogether, they made 4 passes through Mattoon to open up the ditch to lay the rails. And this board here is basically just a compendium in numerical sequence of the project itself. Every one of the pictures on this board is one of those 70 glass plate negatives that we acquired. And what's interesting about them is every one of them, it's etched right into the negative, the Mattoon and the date. So those are all in sequential order. And again, like I said, the vast majority of these photos have never been seen or published.
Amazing.
And that's what makes them really amazing. So then as we come around the corner, and everything flows through here. So this shows, this is the Big Four Railroad Roundhouse and
And
Shops.
we are in the lowest of levels.
We are in the lowest of levels. This is what we call the lower basement. And a lot of people kind of have a hard time understanding lower basement, but when we did the addition to the library in 1995, we added on a significant amount of structure to the north of the existing library. And so we had to get the footings in, and we also had to get it low enough because we put in an elevator, which was a principal part of the project to begin with. So this basement is actually offset to the original basement where we just came from.
Okay.
A lot of people kind of try and picture a basement under a basement, but that's not the way it is.
Henceforth, the term lower.
Exactly. This is another one of the significant displays we have, and we're so fortunate to have this. This is the 1914 Big Four Railroad, what they called evaluation map. It shows all the tracks, all the switches, all the Ys, all the turnoffs, and all the significant features in Mattoon, all the way from Logan Street on the east, all the way to 32nd Street on the west, which at that time, 1914, 32nd Street was the edge of the city limits.
Amazing. I'm a big fan of maps.
And then a lot of the photos that we have on display, just because people that know me know I don't like to have an empty wall. So a lot of the photos up above are these are all part of the photo collection that we had. And so we just, printed them and put them up. These are all just to add context to the story. The other part of this, the other set of photos that we have, that's part of that original 70 photos, but this depot, as some of you may recognize, is still there. And it was built in 1916 and then opened in 1918. And this was the replacement depot for the Illinois Central. So these photos literally show from when the foundation went in to the completion of the depot. And these are just amazing photos, and the quality on them is just unbelievable.
Who knew black and white photos could show so much history?
Exactly, yeah. And of course, part of this other array, like everything on this array, are photos that the library already owned. Like I said, when we decided to do this, and with the wall space that we're using, we just thought it was imperative to show literally every photo we had.
You have so much space in this one lower section that you were able to enlarge photos, so you can, as we've hopefully been able to capture a little bit with a video camera.
Exactly.
Great detail. You're able to see
Yes.
with clarity
Right.
in each photo
Right.
what exactly the work that was going on.
Exactly, yeah.
Chris, we appreciate the walking tour here at the local history center. We give you a final comment. What you have here for the community, 6+ years of hard work, and what do you think you've added here for viewers and local community members to come check out? The local history center provides what to our local communities?
Well, I think it just provides a real background for people to understand how Mattoon started, how Mattoon developed, what some of the significant things were over the years, and why Mattoon is still the vibrant community it is today. And it's something that I'm really proud of. I tell people, I was in business for 47 years, but this has turned out to be my life's work, I think.